Hello and welcome to the Lore of Discworld. It's been a while since we've been here to discuss the wonderful, subversive, satirical and perceptive universe of Terry Pratchett's Turtlebound Disc. But as part of this return to form for the series, we'll be making a few changes before we get into the topic of today's video. So if you will bear with me, I will be most grateful. For example, while the Lore of Discworld is a perfectly acceptable descriptor for what we set out to achieve here on the channel, it isn't a very evocative title, though not quite as bad as a Leonard de Quirm name. I dread to think what he would have named an online video essay series if he had the chance or attention span to produce them. In any case, going forward, I would like to welcome you to the Unseen Archives. Hopefully, going forward, we will have more bespoke assets for the channel, instead of just whatever I can cobble together, so you can hopefully look forward to that and a bit of a better presentation all round. I decided that if I'm going to make a return to this series, I'm going to do it good and proper. I'll be continuing to experiment with the shorts format too, as they are quite fun and easy to put together, so keep an eye out for those as well. But moving on to the reason we're all here today, the topic of today's video, I'd like to pick up on a subject that we've discussed in passing before, the Byzantine guild network of the glorious city of Ankh-Morpork. There are many guilds we could dig into, but for the time being, we'll be focusing on the guild with possibly the most influence on the streets of Ankh-Morpork, and certainly the one with the most day-to-day level influence on the citizens, that being the Thieves Guild. One could argue that with the exception of the Guild of Lawyers, there is no organisation in the city more dedicated to depriving the honest citizen of his hard-earned dollars. But the actual truth of the Thieves Guild falls back on the strangeness of human nature and our apparently innate love of seeing things organised and operating within a structure. I suppose this sort of thing helps us maintain the illusion that we have some semblance of control over our lives. For as long as people have understood the concept of ownership, there has been the notion of theft. The idea that a person might want to possess an object and will not see the notion that it could belong to another person as a relevant detail in the conversation. These people will either take the object of desire for themselves, or contract the act itself out to a third party with the particular skills and for whom their own desires to possess money, or the chance to prove their skills in this field, leads them to similarly disregard any particular morals relating to their profession, or the possession of certain objects. The Thieves Guild of the Twin City in this day and age serves as an official facility for these desires to be enacted by all those with the professional talent or inclination. It is crime that has become so organised, it technically isn't even crime anymore. But in the grand scheme of history, it is an extremely new guild, having been proposed and organised under the auspices of the current patrician of the city, Lord Havelock Vetinari. That is not to say that the organisation has sprung out of nowhere, however. Especially in Morpork, the adherence to the concept of law and mutual respect between neighbours was considered optional by many of its citizens. Every neighbourhood has its gangs of youths vying for turf, long-standing and violent feuds that last for years, a complex web of wars, alliances, treaties and the like. Always the most serious thing to any boy of a certain age, to be held above all other concerns, even life and death itself. At least until everyone's mam called them back in for tea, scolding them for their new bruises and the tears in their trousers that their dad worked so hard to be able to afford them. But gangs do go beyond these simple teenage tussles over tumble-down turf in Treacle Mine Road in the Scowers. The play of children teaches skills needed for the much more real and unpleasant world, where men and women would rather not be beholden to the gears of society, sold that which the man has prohibited to them, stolen from those who refuse to pay protection, or those unwise enough to stray into their turf, often coming to blows when the areas of the city deemed to be theirs were subjected to the predation of their unwelcome peers. The best were often hired to work in Ankh, or even grew rich enough to operate lavish homes and legitimate business fronts there. Of course, the more prosperous half of the city certainly had its fair share of homegrown evils too, but those that would go on to be the Guild of Thieves most definitely had their roots in the gangs in Morpork, rather than the white collars to be found in Ankh. So it continued for centuries, all throughout the city with the possible exception of the Shades. That most ancient and dangerous warren of the city operates almost entirely under its own unique rules of survival of the fittest that would make Herbert Spencer proud, shortly before he was mugged of everything up to and including his pulse. The Shades is an area that really needs its own video, though, so for the time being let us settle for saying that it was too dangerous even for the precursor Thieves Guild to ply their trade. While we have scant details of the rise of Vetinari and the removal of his predecessor, Lord Snapcase, we do know that one of the catalysts for the Mad Lord's downfall was the punishment he granted to a thief. His punishment of the criminal Spooner Bogus, that of being made to eat his own nose, proved to be the last straw for the population that had just about had enough of the petty, selfish, and insane despot and his disregard for the welfare, opinions, or simple right to exist of those under his jurisdiction, events that led to Lord Snapcase being hung up fatally by his figgin. Though quite what this means has been lost to posterity. On the subject of unclear meanings regarding Mr. Bogus's nose, one can only hope that it was cut off first prior to the eating, otherwise it creates a mental picture of anatomical improbability enough to keep you awake at night. Ugh. Another point of interest that we could take away from that, if you'll allow me a swift diversion, is that the family name of Bogus does go on to be one of the most significant in the Thieves Guild. Being an old family in the guild who, if they had had the foresight to steal entire houses and plots of land and then rent them back to people, might well have been seen as one of the oldest and most wealthy noble families in the city. The current head of the guild is of this family, Mr. Josiah Herbert J.H. Flannelfoot, to his friends, Bogus. Interestingly, by the time of the publication of the complete Ankh-Morpork in 2012, we can see that he now has the title of Sir Bogus, though this is not mentioned elsewhere, and Mr. does seem to be the official honorific used for the head of the Thieves Guild. So, quite how this is a development of his character, or simply a quirk of that particular publication, we do not know. But back on the historical track, we find ourselves with the ascension of the patricianship of Havelock Vetinari, the man who set out in his own quiet and firm way to revolutionise the city he now held domain over. With this, he let several of the city's more unofficial guilds come into the light and be recognised. While this was met with general approval from the masses, with bodies like the Guild of Seamstresses finally becoming official, people did find themselves wondering exactly how he intended to make a formal, legal organisation out of a profession that made its living entirely outside the bounds of any form of legal structure. What the new patrician did, in fact, was remarkably straightforward. Having invited all the leading thieves and organised crime leaders to the palace, he proposed that he would legalise their activities, recognise their structure as an official guild within the city, and set up a system of checks and balances. The auspices of the City Watch would be dialed back, and they would be allowed to set up an official guild hall, have a seat reserved to all civic events, and have the right to issue city and guild certificates. In exchange for all this, they were to be made responsible for controlling the levels of theft within the city. All victims would be allocated a maximum level that could be taken from them per year, with hand-signed receipts to prove such steps had been taken. As to the unlicensed crime, well, the guild would be at liberty to enforce how those who operated outside of their system were to be punished, as if the rules were not being enforced, then everything they did would be recriminalised and punishments would be applied retroactively and very much from the top down. Of course, the leaders of the various thieves' gangs could not believe their luck. They had, in fact, been handed the keys to the plantation and were planning to make off with just as many bananas as they possibly could carry. This new patrician was clearly naive, and this system would be oh so easy to exploit. Except a little while later, the patrician summoned the leading thieves again, and, well, let us quote directly from the books. Oh, by the way, there was something else. What was it now? Oh, yes. I know who you are. I know where you live. I know what kind of horse you ride. I know where your wife has her hair done. I know where your lovely children... How old are they now? My, doesn't time fly? I know where they play. So you won't forget what we agreed, will you? And so, the system is in place and has been doing extremely well all this time, despite all the evidence to the contrary listed in the articles of common sense. Many people in the city, especially the richest and most noble, realised that they could simply make an annual payment to the guild to ensure their complete safety. These blue bloods, who would never be persuaded to pay their taxes at sword point, will cheerfully pay the Thieves Guild for a little brass plaque to put on their front doors, just like all the common folk, one that proudly proclaims that its owner is safe from all official housebreaking. Of course, the guild in turn is taxed by the city based on their annual taking, so in a roundabout way, Vetinari still gets his due, with much less fuss and bluster from the upper crust, should he have actually attempted more directly to have them submit to something as common as taxation. The highest amongst the guild have taken to this system like a duck to water, it has to be said, never being particularly fond of the dark and smoky cellars they previously inhabited, and instead enjoying the airy, well-lit halls of their new guild buildings. Young recruits are schooled both on and off the streets, though, with the latter case, veterans amongst the guild despise the notion that their protégés are wasting their time on concepts of theory, rather than learning their best practices hands-on. They argue that how best to pick a pocket, or to knock someone unconscious with a swift blow to the head, that nevertheless ensures no long-term harm to the customer, is a skill that no amount of book learning can teach. These young aspirants to the guild primarily come from three sources: the children of existing members, hopeful young prospects from the city brought in as apprentices, and the ever-present tradition of foundlings. As we have mentioned in the past, all the guilds within the city take in those left in their care without question or complaint, giving them a family, a home, and an upbringing. In truth, there are far worse fates for a child, especially amongst the thieves, who are considered one of the better guilds for a foundling charity. Such wayward orphans are given surnames of famous thieves, as they lack ones of their own. Examples given throughout the series to us being the surnames of Bogus, Lud, and Cracker, though I am sure there are several more that we have never been told. In addition to the aforementioned Mr. Bogus who leads the guild, we do have a number of named guild members in the hierarchy to draw upon from various sources such as the complete Anhk Mopork, the Discworld Companion, and the Thieves Guild Yearbook and Diary. From the actual novels themselves, we know of 3 presidents of the guild, beyond Mr. Bogus the current. These primarily are Ymor, a particularly ruthless thief with a distinct motif in his flock of trained ravens, and his successor, the ambitious, if failed, former assassin, Stren Withel. These two appear in the very first book, The Colour of Magic, though quite how Ymor met his end and Stren was able to take a seat that he longed for so many years is never explicitly made clear, though the companion does list Stren as becoming the president, so you could surmise that this change of power took place during the confusing, violent mêlée de trio and city-destroying fire that started in the Broken Drum between the Assassins, Thieves, and Merchants guilds, during their attempts to variously assassinate, rob, or protect the city's first ever tourist, respectively. Not the finest hour for any guild involved, I feel. The other guildmaster of note is one Erdo Van Pew, leader of the guild during the events of Guards. Little is known about him save that he has the honour of being the first criminal ever apprehended by one Lance Constable Carrot Iron Founderson. After the simple-minded but determined young officer of the watch marched into the guild building, arrested Van Pew and marched him through the streets in irons to be left at the gates of the palace, there was, needless to say, a bit of a stir. After being presumably freed of his restraints, Van Pew came before Lord Vetinari to complain, but found he was unable to successfully explain how this one man had been able to walk into the entire Thieves Guild house, past its members, and do exactly what he did without being stopped in any way. This was the first hint that his lordship ever got of the potential trouble Constable Iron Founderson would one day be for him and his city in the years to come, but that story is best saved for another day. We do not know when or how Van Pew came to lose his position. Based on the timeline we are given, it seems likely that the current Mr. Bogus was his direct successor, but this is pure conjecture. As to the rest of the hierarchy, we are in fact given a definitive list of subjects taught by the guild to its young students and vagabonds, as well as the current staff who teach them, so, in no particular order, let's go through it. In the position of headmaster, we have the aforementioned J.H. Bogus. Mr. Harry can't remember his nickname Jones, serves as both headmaster's bodyguard and school secretary. Mr. Ben Bendy Fidlam teaches sociology and general street crime. Team building and nocturnal crimes with Mr. Ken Nutboy Cracker. Humanities and extramural crimes is taught by Horatio Rope Dancer Huber. Ronnie Cheez-It Bogus teaches applied mathematics and intellectual crimes. Mr. Lawrence Leakey Ludwinlis Bonneweir teaches feng shui and intrusion crimes. The acts of domestic science and shop crime are the purview of Mr. Herbert Glamour. Mr. Sidney Nosher Lobbygo teaches process mapping and violent street crime. Millie Madame Estrot teaches modern languages and confidence trickery. He Screwy Structure DCL Quirm teaches the arts of prison survival. Miss Lettice Babblejack is responsible for the education of music, stalking, and malicious loitering. One Professor Albert Snakes handles metalwork and the recognition of hallmarks. In other little side roles, we do also find a Doctor, Dr. M.D. Ninglimmer, Guild Doctor and First Aid Instructor, and a Miss Muffin Dillybag, Guild Counsellor and Child Psychiatrist. As for the thieves who don't wish to fall into line, those who assume the organisation of the Guild, they have found themselves suddenly subject not to the lenient hands of the City Watch, where their actions might result in some jail time or a fine or a bribe, but to the Guild, who will not tolerate any market competition likely to lose them the golden goose they have found in their possession. Unlicensed thieves will so often find themselves subjected to the kind of punishment that leaves no room for doubt in their minds that they have made a very poor choice. Such unfortunate chances may find themselves strung up in one of several locations throughout the city, or several of them at once if their daring do really did push their luck and the patience of the Guild. The most common location for the eventual remains to be strung up is by the Guild Hall itself, on a bespoke and beautiful woodwork gallows that stands as a riot of ricotto carving by one noted artificer, Ralph Gibbons. Everything about these official gallows screams, in the most deliberate and subtle way possible, go on, try your luck. In the present day, the Guild has continued to be more forward-thinking and as modern as possible, partnering with the Merchants Guild to offer special discount rates and free gifts such as barbecue sets, glassware, or voucher booklets to those who enter the city for the very first time and wish to make an official mugging part of the authentic Ankh-Morpork experience and a memorable part of their vacation for all concerned. I cannot help but feel that this is perhaps a crueler punishment than simply losing your wallet. But with the advent of the railway, they have expanded their services to include crime committed on the trains within the Ankh-Morpork hegemony, as well as providing the lost and found property services at all official railway stations under the writ of the Ankh-Morpork and Stow Plains Hygienic Railway Company. All items are returned with no questions asked, or answered for a purely nominal administrative fee paid to the kiosk in question upon application to retrieve your goods. Quite how many goods were genuinely lost, and how many were taken in by guild members plying their trade to ensure that said offices meet their target quotas, is probably best left to speculation. All in all, I think this wraps up everything that need be said about the infamous, illustrious, and idiosyncratic Guild of Thieves for the time being. As always, I hope I have been as entertaining as I am informative, and if you have anything to add to the conversation, please do so in the comments below. And if you'd like to see more entries from the archives, please do like, subscribe, and do all the little things that appease the almighty algorithms. For now, though, I have been Albion. Thank you for joining me today, and I shall see you next time. Goodbye.